Okay, hello everyone. Welcome and thank you for coming to this presentation, Play the Cutscene, the characters of Rise. My name is Abdenour Bashir. I'm a senior character artist at Crytek. I've been in the industry for around 15 years, 12 of those as a developer, alternating between environment art and character art. Today's session will be split in two parts, but firstly I'd like to show you a video of the game for those of you that don't know about Rise. So let's just start it.
Rated M for mature.
What's your name, soldier?
Marius. But my name is of no import. My story, however, is.
You must save Rome. Save it from there.
And of those who venture there, few return.
Let you have all the glory now, can I?
Your empire needs you. Rise.
Fight for your father. Fight for your legion. Fight for Rome.
Achieved with CryEngine.
Oops. Okay, the video just came on my screen. So I'll be talking about the first part, the character art point of view, and Christopher Evans, our technical art character art director, will be talking about the technical art part and the animation. So, a quick overview of the session. I'll be briefly going through some of the look development before talking about some of the challenges we had to face for this project and some of the new tech we developed to overcome them. We'll also run through some workflow example and our facial pipeline work. So, some context element about Rise that made the development especially difficult and challenging. It was a new IP with a new team, mostly hired for this project. For a new console, the Xbox One, we had an emphasis being put on movie quality, with most of our pipeline to be made during production for the first day console release, and all that in a fairly short amount of time. So we were involved in the art direction of our character quite a lot, and it mostly meant researching different visual styles that would help support the game vision and making inspiring shape design and texture work to give us an idea of what makes a character interesting. Once we had a better idea of what we wanted to go for, we started looking into the tech needed to support it. So here are a couple of those that strongly impacted the game from a character perspective. PBR, real-time cloth simulation, hair tech and cloth. PBR, or physically based rendering, was one of the major changes brought into our engine. Our graphic engineer, Nicolas Schulz, gave a talk that went over this more in detail this week. So I won't get too much into detail myself, but in a nutshell, it was a major feature that helped us achieve a more realistic material look with the benefit of having assets reacting better to different light situations without the need for specific materials. So what it means is you could make an asset and give it one material and it would look good anywhere without extra work. It also affected our pipeline mostly by pushing a more scientific approach to how we tackle texturing. studying the composition of material, their layering, and trying to recreate it in your processes. Hair is an area where we do not really stick to one specific pipeline. It's character-based and varies between artists. We heavily relied on 3D Studio Max plugin on Matrix, and any hair creation tool could be used really, but Ornatrix was the most powerful and versatile one we could evaluate at the time. It also kept all the modifier stacks and allowed us to adjust if we needed. We could generate both high poly as well as a low poly mesh. Here you have an example of one of the high poly. This is an example of the same setup, but with a low poly result and the endgame final look. So the wireframe in-game to give you an idea of the density of the mesh. And a quick turnaround. On that turnaround, you can notice the highlight, which is basically following the hair direction. I'll get into how we do that in a little bit. The same technique was used to make our fur and any hair cap that we would use for blending our skin and our hair setup. So on top of that, we could also use view align cards, which are similar to traditional planes. With this example, you can see me adjusting the width of the cards on Oswald's hair. They are really, really good to fake volume, density, and coverage in different angles. Here you can see Marius, who basically used both a traditional plane and view align cards. It works pretty well together. Our hair setup are supported by directionality maps, as I mentioned earlier. It gives the hair direction so the highlight can follow it. Bogdan Kohl, one of our tool programmers, created a plugin that would take the hair mesh setup and work out the normal direction of individual hair strand using the UVs as reference point. The result would be a very accurate map, done very fast with the same setup. Cloth was pretty much started from ground zero and ended up being a very powerful and versatile system. On top of the real-time simulation cloth, we have the option to pre-simulate cloth in Maya cloth, for instance, or any cloth simulation system on a dense render mesh and use Alembic cache to export it in the game. It was very useful for our more demanding characters that only appeared in cutscenes. Here you can see the particles that makes our simulation mesh, and these particles basically drive the render mesh. You also could see some of the extra animation, secondary animation setup. That's a final thing. So now we'll be looking into some character assets and briefly walk through their process. Creation process, sorry. Got the same error this time. Have to go through that again. Okay, whoops. Sorry for that. We usually start with a rough concept, and often it's only a front and a back view, and is iterated with feedback from a technical standpoint as well as an artistic one. Some character need to go through a long process. I'll come to it in a moment. In this other example, it's a very simple front view with very basic shading. Some other characters, like Oswald, went through many iterations, but ended up with very detailed concepts. In some cases, we have to go through a very, very long process of iteration before the final look can be achieved. Great example is Marius. He went through many, many, many changes during production. You can see here just a sample of those changes. Sorry for the steppings. Yeah, we eventually met it, so that was worth the work. So Okay, the next stage, which is a very important one, is gathering reference and information from the concept artist on area you might have difficulty to read, or you can't find inspiration for. Once you have a clearer vision, you go on to the next stage. White box is made for most of our assets. I'm sure you're all aware of what a white box is, but in our case it consists of a simple model that gives most of the design information, general shape, base color, and any part of the character that needs specific rigging element. This asset is roughly rigged by our technical artists and passed on to animation and design. This allows them to start their prototypes if needed. If an asset made it to the base mesh part, every questions in a technical standpoint or art direction or design should be answered at this stage. The artist can just go crazy here and focus on making the best character he can with a given time. The model is made to contain every part of the characters. We try to model everything in our base mesh, bolts or stitches. It allows us to really do any changes that we want by changing just specific area if needed. We also happen to model the pattern in some of our cloth if needed. And another great use of base meshes that complicated is to make very, very simple renders. This one is just a very simple V-Ray setup. We use those renders to help the decision makers have confidence to give the go-ahead and serve as another set of reference, even if it was rough, for our shader programmers to look at. So we got a couple of examples here. We then take this, the asset in parts in ZBrush. Those parts are delimited based on how you split up the UVs. Marius' example has 9 shells UVs. We split those parts in subtools and subdivide them, so each can reach 4 million polygons, as it seems to be the right spot for performance versus resolution. As an example, Marius was split in about 10 different tools, with each containing sub-tools, and the culminating total amount of polygon was roughly above 130 million polygons. So we really needed that detailing for what we wanted to do. Most of our characters are seen from very, very close. And here you can see some of the parts that can make a character. It's Marius tier 1 armor for the Legionary one. One of the main reasons we split it as well is we don't tend to use macro textures or tileable textures to do the fine details, but we actually put it directly into the mesh. So the information in the mesh itself is baked into very high-res textures. Here is another example with Damocles armor, showcasing the kind of level detail we get into it, slightly closer look of those details. So you can see here all the splits in the base meshes and how they are detailed. ZBrush workflow was obviously a very artist-specific pipeline, but the approach was generally to sculpt a shape. We bring the base mesh, like here in the example of the Lorica for Marius. And then you sculpt general shapes that include giving some history hints, like arrows that might have left some trace on the side during a battle. These little details kind of helps give some depth to the characters. We then leave the detail pass and macro detail to surface noise and procedural technique that you can easily do in ZBrush. We have a lot of presets that we created during the production. We import the base mesh or a decimated version of the mesh in the engine before starting the texturing. We UV all our base meshes. You can then set up your basic PBR material for different parts. Our characters are seen from very close, as I said before, so we really needed to split those parts to support that constraint. So here you can see an example of a set of basic materials applied to our base mesh in the engine. So we texture our high-res assets using multiple 4K textures. So each part has a basic set of 4 channels that includes the diffuse, the gloss, the specular, and the normal map on our base meshes. That can give us really, really high resolution textures, as you can see here. 144K, this number comes for Marius Tier 2 armor at about 9 patches, and if you do the maths, that goes pretty high. The way we approach the texturing differs per artist again, but if we take Marius as an example, we would, after creating the PBR, ready-based textures, we split our material into layers in Photoshop and apply those masks created in ZBrush to just give more detail, like cavity, smooth edge, masking. All that is based from the research that we've done before with the reference. We also paint specific masks like leak on the textures, blood, or anything that can make the design very interesting. After the high-res is textured and done, we start making the game resolution mesh. Every character is unique and has its own budget, but usual guideline is to make it look as close as possible to the high-res while avoiding wasting polygon. So we can end up with numbers from 40K to 160K triangles per characters. A good example of a high-res characters is Oswald. It's a character you encounter mainly in cutscene. He's around 140K triangles, most of those being used to support his hair setup and fur setup, which is pretty heavy. And another thing to point out is most of our character, the main characters only have load 0, which is our main load, avoiding any popping in game. To create the load 0, we usually take our base mesh, level 3 or 2, and start reducing it manually. And we also use a decimated version of the high-res as a reference to make sure we don't lose any shape in the process. This is a very, very important mesh, the most important. It's used in cutscene, in-game execution, and also for marketing, so it can take up to a week to complete. Another part, and probably the most important and most time-consuming part, is making the game asset and the baking process. In our case, it means transferring every texture made on the high-res to the in-game model. It includes a normal map and every alpha or AO map, as well as the diff and the spec. To prepare the baking, we have to export each part as a subtool separately to avoid any intersection. We can end up roughly with hundreds of parts. Marius, again, is a very good example of that. So obviously, you can imagine it can take a lot of our time. So we developed a tool to speed up that process. If this thing wants to start. Yep. Okay, so we created tools. Bogdan Cole, one of our tool programmers, helped us develop that tool. So basically, it's a batching tool that take XNormal functionality and put it in a very friendly user interface. On that tool, you basically bring all your high-res on one side, all your low-res in another part, create jobs, apply your high-res for those jobs. You can put up to 5 textures per jobs, and then you bring your low poly on the low poly part of the job. And once you've done all your job, you can have files that look a bit like that example with Marius' helmet. Just for the helmet, it was split in 16 parts. Each part had as many high-res as needed with their loads and a minimum of 3 textures per high-res. You could also just apply all the options that you have from XNormal plus a little extras that we created to speed our work. And then you just click start batching and it would just do its thing. So a big time saver. The resultant textures are brought back into the Photoshop and put back together. So So our final game asset textures budgets contain usually 4 main textures, authored at 4K again, to keep the quality as high as possible. And then we reduce it using our own Creative plugin. Basically, the information is embedded in the TIFF file. And we are coupling also our normal map and roughness, which is the gloss, to reduce specular aliasing at the end. So you end up with 3 textures, the GIF, the spec, and the DDNA. An example of some diffuse textures. I don't know if you can see it, but it's fairly dark. Some specular example. Here you can see the gloss map. Most important texture, the gloss map. Most of the material surface information is on the gloss map. The normal map as seen in the editor, and the wireframe for Damocles armor. And finally, you can see it in-game with the lightning. Another example with Marius. You can notice here that we don't waste polygons, even though our characters are fairly high. Every triangle is made to support the shape and capture the high res as best as we can. So here's without the wireframe in-game. And finally, Oswald with his first setup. So some of the material we use for our characters, so the illum, it's basically a material that we use on everything. Everything including environment, cloth, even our armors, our leather. It also have a very nice screen space SSS option that you can apply. Then we have our human skin shader for high fidelity skins. It also have a SSS, a little bit more realistic. It can also have a translucency map amongst other options. And the eye shader is probably the most frequent creep of our shaders. It's got a lot of options. Some of them include lens distortion, iris self-shadowing, and SSS approximation. Here there is an example of the SSS on the human skin, so I don't know if you can see, but right now it's turned off, and I'm going to turn it on. So it gives a really nice smooth result without losing the normal map detail. So now I'm going to give you another example with the translucency map. So here you have Marius' head in a fairly neutral light. And I put a very strong light on the back so you can see the translucency in action. We also painted some underlying element like veins and to help give it more interesting look. So now I'll be giving you a brief overview of the facial pipeline from a character art point of view. So the faces are considered separate characters, mostly because the facial pipeline was developed in parallel of the character body. And they had their own shader and pipeline R&D as well. And I have to credit Hanno Heghorn, our character art director, at the time for kickstarting most of them. So our pipeline follows the photogrammetic approach. A set of photographs from different angles are taken and used to create a 3D model of the actor face. We do it also for different poses. Chris will get into it a little bit later. Here is an example of a neutral scan resulting from those poses, photos. Sorry. We get the raw neutral scan, and this is where the job of a character artist starts. So we adapt a unified mesh topology to it, making sure that every facial feature are in sync with their key edge loops on the mesh. That version of the model is sent to 3Lateral. Again, Chris will get into it a little bit more later. We clean up the captured mesh and start working on the characterized version of the head. So what that means is taking the actor and kind of giving him makeup to put him in his role. So art and direction and concept provide a concept with a revised look of the actor face. And we try to capture it the best we can while doing minimal changes to some key area of the faces. We then sculpt the detail like pores and add scars or feature portrait in the concepts manually. So the texturing is usually made by hand, and we start by sampling some of the photo rays skin tones, and we adjusted to fit our need. We start paying values information and color informations to bring the color, the textures a little bit better. We add veins and underlying skin informations, and the final pass, we add external skin detail like dirt, freckles, facial scars, or any weathering like sun marks. We finally add pores and wrinkles using our ZBrush masks. You can see here. In some cases, we also add eyebrows. We paint directly eyebrows into the face to support the planes that we have on our heads. Then we have the wrinkle maps. So the way we approach that is by making an atlas map. I'm not going to go too much into detail, but the gist of it is we split the face in separate areas. We can have up to 24 of those areas, and we use different wrinkle poses to bake multiple wrinkle maps. And then with the mask area that I mentioned just before, and those wrinkle maps, we use a tool called Wrinkleman that was created by Jérôme Charles, one of our programmers. And it basically spit out an atlas map. So this atlas map is basically a collage of many wrinkles. You can have as many as you want. It takes the area of the face based on the mask that you created and copy and paste it into this big collage, basically. So I'm going to quickly start a video that shows this in action, the wrinkle maps in action. So here you can see the normal map only of Marius. So then we add the wrinkle maps. If you couple that with a gloss map and the specular map that should come now, and finally the diffuse map, which is basically the albedo, but we call it diffuse. That's what we get in game with the translucency map, sorry. And that's the final result. To that we add the hair, and we have our head. So I'm a bit early to... Okay, what is it? Whoops, there's a video that came out, sorry. And here you can see the final look of the head. So, I think I messed up. Whoa. Don't know what happened there, but it skipped a couple of slides. So, again, sorry. So that kind of concludes my part. Yeah, sorry, I kind of had. And I'm going to now pass it on to Chris. I hope it was informative and interesting. Thank you.
All right. Hey guys, my name is Chris Evans. I'm the tech art director at Crytek in Frankfurt. So I'm going to talk a bit about the character technology on Rise. So first, I just want to cover some of the pillars which what that kind of means is like when the project starts out, a bunch of like guys with suits get in a room and they say like, these are the main things. No, I'm joking. But it's basically, these are the main things that are important to the game. The whole team got together and we said, we have this opportunity to make this game. We're going to work with Microsoft. We're going to work on something we're not going to talk about right now because it was very early days. This image is from one of the first Durango kits we ever got. It's one of the first character sculpts we ever got running real-time on a Durango kit. That was what the Xbox One was called back then. So the first pillar was kind of play the cutscene, which meant to us that there weren't going to be any cutscene rigs. Peter, the director, wanted to be able to zoom into the eyeball at any time, and to make characters that had to stand up to that kind of fidelity was a bit of a challenge, I would say. It was a bigger scope, so we had 15 story characters in the game, and I think we had 28 to 30 different unique faces, 20 to 24 different unique faces. If you guys know, like our main IP, Crisis, you're kind of a masked protagonist that runs around shooting dudes. We had more rigging in the hands than we had in any of the facial stuff on Crisis. We had on C3 we had 4 main story characters and 30 minutes of cinematics of linear content. And on Rise we had 15 story characters and 120 minutes of linear content. And as Abe was saying, we had a new team of people. The entire cinematics department, we had one guy that used CryEngine before. So it was a really good time for us to reboot some of the ways we thought of stuff and kind of walk through the fire, eat your own dog food as you So I'm going to go a bit fast because we have a lot of stuff that we want to show you guys and cram in cool stuff. So we really wanted, I mean, you just saw all of the amazing work that the character art team did. It was really important to us that we had like a handcrafted feel to the game. We wanted a consistent, strong art direction through the game, and we didn't want something where you have like photoreal faces, but they're inconsistent with the world. So I think as you could see, the character heads, faces, everything felt kind of consistent in the world. And we used the really talented character art team we've been building, and we didn't just have them like cleaning scan data and going through this stuff. Another thing to us that was a bit new is the level of performance capture that we did on the project. The performance really mattered when you're casting somebody for face and for body. When Peter has attended 16 casting sessions to, pick the right actress or something, then it really matters that, or John, who played Marius in the game. It was really important that what he saw on stage from these actors actually made it into the game. Some of these tiny little nuances in the performances. So that kind of led to certain challenges for us, and one of the challenges was universal rigs that would blend in and out of any of the cutscenes. So we had to think, what is the best thing that we can do on the hardware itself, and take a really hard look at that, because we didn't want to have any kind of special setups for cutscenes and for linear content. We also said, hey, we have a new team, new hardware, unmovable deadline. Let's move to Maya, because we wanted to do that for a while. So we moved to Maya. We were like, hey, let's rewrite all the tools. Let's write some virtual production tools. I'm going to talk about some of that. And it's a story-driven game, and everything that we tried to do was to serve the story, because that was the most important thing that we wanted to get across. We wanted the player to feel like he was, the hero playing through this really cool story in this really cool world, and we wanted him to identify with the different people that he talked to, and we wanted like some of the stuff, all of the stuff that happened on stage, all the happy accidents and everything, to make it out into the game. Riem talked about the modular rigging stuff that we did on Tuesday. So if you guys have the vault, hop on there, because Riem and also Vlad talked about a lot of the rigging stuff that we did. So I'm just going to touch on it for a second, but you can watch their entire upskirt, if you will, because it's a lot of talking about skirts because it's Roman soldiers and stuff. So everything, in order for us to accomplish what we wanted to accomplish, 2 things were really evident. Number one is that we needed to switch to kind of a modular rigging pipeline, and the main rigs that we use, they're all built by Python. It's about 7,000 lines of Python that builds each rig. But we had 3 riggers on the project, and I say 2.5 because I'm in meetings half of the time. So that's how it plays out. But with that number of people, we really need to take a hard look at how do we skin characters, how do we get characters in the game, where can we save time. But again, for that, you should take a look at Riem's talk. The other thing that was evident was with the level of facial complexity that we wanted, we just weren't going to be able to, we didn't have the muscles in-house to pull it off. So we started looking around, and instantly the first thing that I told the guys is I said, you know, we're not going to outsource rigging. I mean, you can't outsource rigging. We just need to, I mean, you know, we need to just man up. And the more I looked, it was a bit weird because I was a bit proven wrong. I met Vlad, and we started talking, and it became evident that his company, 3Lateral, they really kind of, their goals were aligned with what our goals were, which is to try to get kind of film quality facial rigs running on next-gen hardware. And they kind of took the gauntlet, and we worked together. And I had originally told the team, I told management, we're not going to be able to innovate. You know, Crytek, we're this innovative company. If we're outsourcing, I'm telling you right now, we're not going to innovate. We're not going to have the best looking facial stuff because we're outsourcing, we're working with an outsourced vendor, because that's a very dirty word if you're an artist. And then it was a really interesting experience for us because we were able to innovate. We were able to work with a partner who was invested in having really cool stuff. And it was the way that we built the pipeline made it a lot less difficult. So also with virtual production, I mean, we worked with the guys out at Imaginarium. We were their first project. That's Andy Serkis's new studio over in London. And we would have like 10, 12 actors with head cams recording face, body, sound, everything all at once. And that's kind of like drinking from the fire hose, I always joke, because you have so much data, and we had to make a back end to load that data to allow animators to work with that data. This is just some of the modular components that we had for the rigs. But again, if you really want to see the rigging stuff in depth, then I would say just loop up Riem's talk. So just talking about Marius on Xbox. So he landed, I mean, that's quite a lot of triangles. And I used to joke that like coming to work every day was kind of like Christmas because I worked on games. You know, Riem had never, I had to load up old game characters to show her how lucky she is to be working on a next-gen title because I could articulate every part of the character. I could go to Abe and I could, you know, we were doing things like when Marius bends forward and the blades of his Lorica armor open, you can see his tunic underneath, you can see chainmail. If you look really closely in some of the formation scenes, I mean, there are lines of leather that tie the armor on the inside that you can see between the cracks of the armor. I mean, we were able to kind of rig and deform everything, and I was able to kind of push through a rule that we really didn't want to see any interpenetration of the metal, and we were able to pretty much come close to that. So Marius, this is a number that's growing and growing. One of the R&D guys said, if we go over 512 joints, the hardware will catch fire, and we're going to... But with DLC content, we've been adding some joints. So now he's actually at over 800 joints. But because you can play Glot and some pretty interesting characters with the latest DLC. So 260 of these are in the face, but I'll talk about the face a bit later. This is an example of blending in and out.
Centurion Everest to me! Display this from the highest place you can find. When the barbarians see it, they'll run. Battle to the hours.
So that's kind of the idea, is we want to have really high quality linear content. You're doing something really cool. You're throwing a bag to your friend, and then bam, you have the controller in your hands. And I mean, you probably saw E3. You know, the ship is coming down, everything's being destroyed, and then you get control, and or you walk through that experience, and you just never saw things that high fidelity that you could play through. That was you know, so that was one of the key things we wanted to focus on. One interesting thing was kind of character physics. I didn't realize this, but I was looking the other day. This kind of crept up on us. We started by physicalizing a joint here, a joint there. Evo H, one of the programmers, he delivered this kind of joint physics system to us that was really, really great. And we started using it, and then slowly started abusing it. And so we have about 70 physicalized joints on Marius. We use it for cloth, leather, armor, muscle, fat. This is a video that he made, so we pumped up the values a bit. Things are a bit more jiggly and stuff than in the game. He's an animation programmer, so of course this is at 60 hertz. We call him 60 Hertzig, Evo H, Evo Hertzig. armor, the leather straps, the brush on the helmet is simulated, the dangly cloth and chainmail on his arms, the dagger, the armor.
Here's the alarm. Any questions? Back them up! What's this then? Got lost, did we?
All right. And it was really cool. There was a lot of back and forth with that. We saw the need that we really needed to support parent and child chains. So we could actually start with the shoulder, which is kind of a joint that plops around, constrained to a plane. Then we could go to a hinge, and then we go to a cone, then we can go... A lot of the leather straps, they're just a bunch of hinges that collide against a plane defined by both knees and the pelvis. For a long time, we were, at E3, we were colliding against a real-time convex hull of the skirt, but doing that on a bunch of Roman soldiers as they're all dying and ragdolling, I was really, really pleased with the solution we came to, because it was performance, and it ended up looking pretty good. So the cloth system that we worked on, we were working with a guy, Mihai Franco, and so Mihai basically sat down with all the artists and was like, okay, we're going to make a new cloth system, so what would you guys want? So we were immediately like, okay, well, we need to have a wrap deformer, we need to do all this stuff. But in the end, it worked. So what you see on disk and what we're talking about today, basically we have a sim mesh, and that sim mesh drives the render mesh, because you want to make a nice render mesh and you don't want to worry about tessellation and biasing and all these, an artist wants to be an artist. So we could really focus on making a nice sim mesh, and at runtime, we wrap deformed the render mesh with the sim mesh. We have a bunch of vertex colors and stuff that set that up. So this is an example. So this was kind of my life for a year or two, was just looking for, we called it butt patrol. And I get a message from Habib or Chad or Microsoft, like, hey, look, here's the butt on this thing. So basically, what the system allows is Reham made a skirt rig which has about 70 joints, and at any time the simulation can target the animation, the rig itself. That's important because as an animator, Marius, we want gameplay before looking cool stuff when it comes to how he can jump around. So there are many times where to feel good, Marius has to deflect and he has to move a meter backwards and turn 180 degrees on a keyframe. So in order to get something like that working, we needed to be able to allow the animators in these big poses, big hits, to actually blend and target their animation. And in some cinematics, actually just hand animate the thing if it's a linear scene and they want complete control over it. So some of the stuff that Abe had touched on earlier, the geom cache pipeline. I'm not going to go over it too much. These examples are probably destruction examples, but in some of the key linear scenes where you walk into and you don't have control over, it was really nice for us to have a system where we could press one button in Maya, we could sim whatever we wanted, and then we could load it off disk. So this is something that Sascha Herford and Axel in Frankfurt, they both worked on. And it's really great because it allows you don't have to worry about how you're going to get something into the game engine. You would just be able to load it up. You could, say how lossy you want it to be, and it was a geom. I don't know if everybody's familiar with kind of point caches or what have you, but it would just load Alembic files directly from Maya into the game engine. We used it a lot for like the tearing sails you saw at E3. For big water volumes, we could keyframe visibility. So when you bust one of these big wooden barbarian structures, we could have a nice edge treatment on all the cracked wood because we could just kind of fade or in one frame keyframe visibility on those cracked edges of the wood. So I'm going to talk about the facial pipeline for a little bit. We decided to go with kind of FEX-based rigs, and it was kind of scan reliant, as you saw from Abe earlier. This was one of the first Marius heads that we had, and this is John, the actor, and they're a little bit different. You can still see the similarities. But one thing I wanted to kind of stop and go over first was, why didn't, a lot of people are pushing for 4D scanning, and instead of having a facial rig or a facial puppet. And we weighed both things, and I mean, really, for the highest fidelity that you want to get on next gen or on a game, it just doesn't really make sense to use kind of a 4D scanning solution. A lot of the time it's a seated capture. It was really important to us, it was important to Peter that we're capturing the performance of the face of the actor with his body and everything, and we're not kind of doing a seated capture of one person and trying to glue that onto a head of a moving guy. It's not editable. I mean, it's basically not editable. I mean, you could get a bunch of markers that just travel on the surface, and then someone goes, well, tell the animator to edit one of these 200, control vertices or something. But it's also pretty inconsistent. It was very important to us that we had the artistic look that the character artists were defining. We didn't want that you would get like tiny little shading bias in the crow's feet, and then like the helmet doesn't cast a shadow on the, we didn't want like super fidelity on the face and then have it look like it's totally disjointed from the world and didn't fit. These kind of techniques also don't lot out, which I'm going to talk about how we lotted stuff. You can't really do dynamic playback, like if you want to have someone saying something with their mouth and making a different, like AI will want to, different look with their eyes or something. It can be pretty low resolution, memory intensive. Tomorrow, actually, John Habel is going to be doing a talk. We had worked with him and Habib and Paul Debevec. He's going to be giving a talk on what could be a pretty good solution to this, which is driving 4D data with puppets. So, you have a rig and trying to figure out a way that you can kind of use the rig to drive the 4D data set that you have. But again, that's research that those guys were doing, and in the end, we didn't use that on Rise. But if anybody's interested in facial stuff, it could be good. I just wanted to go over facts really quick. Like people are always like, well, what the hell is a facial action coding system? Basically, it's just a taxonomy of all of the movements that a face can make, right? So this is Paul Ekman from 1978, and he was one of the guys that came up with this, and they basically just want to encode all of the movements that a face can make. So here's the corner depressor. This is 17. This is the chin boss, so this is the chin raiser, and then this would be them both together. And then here you would add the lip raiser. So it's basically just a way that you encode all of the movements a face can make. Those are encoded here. You also encode an intensity, like A, B, C intensities. And it's not perfect, but it's a really good way of encoding the different ways that a face can move and trying to figure out what the problems are when you look at a face and like why. So I mean, this here is kind of the classic example, which is the Duchenne smile. Like, is it a Pan Am smile? Is it fake? Does it feel creepy? And this stuff is really important because we look at faces so much that if you're just off by a couple millimeters, I mean, you'll hear like an art director be like, I don't know what it is, but it looks creepy. I don't know if she's smiling or she's constipated. You get this stuff a lot, and it's nice to have something to fall back on to say like, okay, well, what's going on? So in Vlad's talk, you can pull it up in the vault. He really went into the work that the guys did on scanning and recording skin sliding, and this is Rachel sitting through her 5-hour fax session, which 5 hours was fast if we were doing it. And here's the guys kind of coaching her through lots of coffee that day, the different fax poses and muscle movements and trying to capture all of that stuff. So again, this is just some of the AggieSoft data. I mean, as you can see, the character artists, they got great reference, but we weren't using the diffuse data from all the poses. So the lines were drawn on the face for alignment and to track skin sliding and musculature. And I mean, if you look at John here, I mean, this is Marius and this is John. So I mean, the guys were really able to go in, and we weren't trying to chase kind of photorealism. It was kind of a hyper-realism. And I really like the style and how it turned out. So just the kind of the face under the skin, we had about 260 joints on the face. On top of those 260 joints, there's about 250 driven blend shapes, and those serve to keep the rig on model at all times. And what that means is the blend shapes keep it aligned with the scan data, so you get all of the subtleties of the face moving throughout all of the fax scanning session, the fax scan session. We had about 85 blend shapes firing at any time, and up to 200,000 vertex deltas computed every frame. And this is in gameplay. I'm not talking about in cinematics. This is going on in gameplay when you're executing guys and fighting guys. So we improved the pipeline by adding 8 scanning influences. Once you go over about 95 joints, you really need to you just can't, you'll kill yourself trying to do it 4 influences. We also updated tangents. That's the thing that Bogdan and Jerome were working on. So here you can see without update and with update. I'll show a little bit of that later as well. So when we talk about, how do you get a face of this fidelity running on next-gen hardware, and I really think that next year when people do a facial talk, or the year, I really think you're still going to have to rely on joints with something deforming on top. So we would have 260 joints with 230 shapes as correctives, and then after about 1 to 2 meters, we would blend off all of the blend shapes correctives based on importance, on how much they were adding to every facial pose. Then you have 260 joints, 8 influences, then 70 joints, 4 influences, then 10 or less joints. And this is what allows, like, when you come up to a barbarian and you kill him and you have that, like, Saving Private Ryan, like, moment, it's what allows his face to look like a super high-res face. So Marius has no LODs because you're playing him most of the time. There was no need to have him, different parts of him blending in and out. This was actually the first time that we got the rig running. I got so tired. Some of the people in this room got so tired of hearing this line.
Attention, lads!
Very loud.
The brave man tastes death once.
And that was when we realized we needed a time code built in the pipeline, because when his head goes back, he's supposed to say "Attention, lads," but the face wasn't matching the body there. This was in February. It's kind of weird to say this stuff is pre-production because this, as you can see,
attention, lads! The brave man tastes death once.
So that was February, and we were like, yeah, and as you see, that's not really what Marius ended up looking like. So we were like, okay, we don't have much time. Let's redo Marius's face. So this is what Marius looked like in the final game.
Worse than I could have imagined. You must save Rome. Save it from there.
You bastards! You murdering barbarian bastards!
Bastards. So let me quickly go through. So this is with just joints, right? So this is the joints of the face. Then this is with correctives. And it might not seem like a lot, but it's really correcting for a lot of the volume of the lips. It's giving him this little thing he's doing with his eyebrow. This is a really cool video that Vlad put together.
Marius
just
Titus,
showing
you are a general of Rome.
How much the blend
I brought
shapes,
you here to protect me from
how
Damocles.
firing on top. You'll see a lot of
But you are Damocles! Marius Titus.
A lot on the lips, keeping volume and just keeping the thing looking like we want it to look while it's deforming, because the joints themselves couldn't do that. So this is with tangent update. I mean, here you can see in like the nasolabial fold, you see the face, the lips update as well. Updating the tangents really helps as well. I mean, I think there are other facial talks this week that said the same thing. It's just something that you're going to have to do, and you're going to have to pay the performance gods for that, because it just really, really helps. So here, I'm not going to show that video. There was a little, like, we actually got the cheeks jiggling and stuff, because the face is just joints, so we use the jiggling system on that. But here you can see the final.
Marius Titus, you are a general of Rome. I brought you here to protect me from Damocles. But you are Damocles! God's protector. You are Damocles!
Indeed I am. And my story is almost at an end. I became driven by one thought, one solitary desire, the desire for vengeance. Vengeance against the Emperor Nero, who had my family butchered. Vengeance against his despicable sons, who betrayed my legion!
So So that was one of the first scenes, actually, that we saw the emotional intensity come across. It was one of the first scenes that Peter wanted us to work on. And when we saw that, we were kind of like, you know, we were a bit taken aback. And of course, you know, stuff does go wrong. Anybody who has moved from, you know, Max to Maya knows Z up, Y up error when you see. Okay, when I talk about emotional intensity, it really also came across in this scene. This is one of the last scenes I'm going to show, and this is Basilius and the Oracle.
Here is your scroll of entry. Don't lose it. You've transformed killing into an art form. I, however, express myself in different ways. Here is some of my more recent work. I've just completed the final embellishments. It's a gift from my father, the Emperor. It's an amazing piece of work, if I may say so myself, containing a hidden surprise. A small compartment inside the head that will make it cry the finest white wine to symbolize his great love for the Empire. Though I suppose it could be made to cry anything, really.
Anything?
Blood. So much blood. Grey mountains drag down the Senate. The streets of Rome will run red. Red with blood. I've seen you in my dreams. Cut me loose if you wish to know your future. Fallen hero of Rome. Spirit of vengeance. Damocles. Damocles. Damocles shall be slain by the great General Maris. And that general shall be slain by Damocles. But Emperor Nero, he can only die by his own sword.
So, and then this was kind of the last thing I wanted to show you guys, which is the actual performance itself, with the headcam data and the actress on stage. So, so you can kind of
blood.
See what we started with and where we're going. We worked
so
with
much blood.
Gareth and the guys at Cubic to
Grey mountains drag down the Senate. The streets of Rome will run red. Red with blood. I've seen you in my dreams. Cut me loose if you wish to know your future. Fallen hero of Rome. spirit of vengeance. Damocles. 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 Damocles shall be slain by the great General Maris.
All right. As I was just saying, that so Cubic was Gareth and the guys at Cubic were solving, and also his team of animators cleaning up the solving for the face onto the rigs. And that's about it for me. I just wanted to say thanks to the guys, thanks to Vlad and Trilateral, the guys at Cubic, Infinite Realities, everybody that made this possible. We had a great time, and thanks for listening to us. And we have 1 minute for questions. No, I don't know how long we have for questions, but come on up if you have questions. I know you have questions.
Good question.
Okay.
How did you guys handle all the damage to the characters? Was that done procedurally?
How do we handle the damage to the characters?
Yeah.
Did Chad ask you to ask this question? No. So the damage, you would see the damage as you progress through the game, but it was always artistically defined. So you wouldn't get hit and then your armor gets dented or something like that. I definitely think that's something that could be done, but it's a bit hard to art direct that, when the player has control. Next thing you'll see like a penis or, I'm just joking.
Thank you.
Questions? All right. Well, the guy that asked the question, we were going to give a copy to Rise to whoever asked the question, so come on up and I'll give you a copy to Rise.
Oh, all right. Awesome. Thanks, man. Hey, games fucking amazing. Like, it was really cool seeing all that stuff. What was the previous talk that you were talking about? There was one about the rigging.
Yeah.
It was on Tuesday. I wasn't here.
Yeah, I wanted to
Yeah.
Catch you later, Jason. Take it easy.
It's really big. That's why I don't want to It's bigger than the stick, though. The presentation is bigger than the stick. Can you pull us off the screen?
Hey, holy crap.
Hey.
Good to see you, too. Who?
No, so basically, make the best content we can possibly want to do animators can be using this right away. And then join some guys who work with it. So instead of joint logic, good. But it can't end up. So after joint logic function, they'll run a process that we selected, we calculate all the vertex deltas needed, so that we knew everything. We found them to specify. We get their number not exceeding 200,000 deltas. They came over, and I would send them my assessment. But it's a very human-intensive process, and they would try to. We still had to walk on them a bit. Cool, thank you very much. These guys, it was funny. It took 4 months to make Mario, and then Vlad and the guys, they told us 23 more characters and 2 months to train to make.